Today we're going to look at three different kinds of things that you may bump into when you use Excel. The first is you have a really large spreadsheet when you look at it, and yet if you go to File Print, well, there isn't even half of that spreadsheet available to print. Well, how did that happen and how can you fix it? Another thing that can happen is, especially with large spreadsheets, the default page breaks aren't really logical, and they need to be moved around and fixed so that your data is represented in the very best way. Well, we'll look at that too. And third, even really maybe more important, is what happens when you have a really large spreadsheet that prints several pages across and several pages down, and how do you print all of that information and help people remember what the data is that you're printing. The larger the spreadsheet, the more that becomes a problem. So what do we do? Well, what we need to do is somehow copy and repeat those column titles that just show up usually in row 1, row 2, but we need them to repeat on each page so that your data is understandable and readable. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Consumer Technology Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and today we will look at all three of those challenges and how to fix them. Looking at our spreadsheet today, we can see that it's a list of movies and what genre they are in, who are some of the starring actors, if we know that, and then the year that it was made. And I can see that it goes 4 columns across through column D, and then as I scroll down here, I can see that it's fairly long. It goes to row 59. Well, if I go to File and Print, and I look at the print preview, wait a minute, it's only one page, and it stops at Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And there's even enough room on this page that I can see that it has deliberately stopped there. Matter of fact, I have movie titles, genres, starring actors, but there aren't years over at the right either. Well, what has caused that? Well, let's go back. And what I need to do then is to go to Page Layout, and in the middle of this second section, which is Page Setup, there is a button that is called Print Area. And what I did originally was set a print area. Well, what I want to do is get rid of that so I can print the whole thing. So I'm going to click the drop-down arrow, and I'm going to clear the print area. Now let me go to File and Print. And wait a minute, as I look at the number of pages here, it says there are 2. And as I look at how this page is filled out, I can see that there's also the column for year made. So this now has become a very different kind of document. Look at that. 2 full pages of information, where before I barely had 1 page of information. Now, occasionally, you do need to set a print area, maybe for security reasons. Maybe the right-hand side of the document has Social Security numbers, or maybe even phone numbers that you want to keep secure. So to create a print area, all you do is select the cells that you do want to print, and then go to that Print Area button, click the drop-down, and set the print area. And even when I click off, it's not necessarily very visible, but when I go to File and Print, and I look at this print preview, well, I'm back to 1 page, only 3 columns. I've removed the print area setting from this spreadsheet, but let's take a peek at it again. And so we'll go to File and Print. And when we do that and we look at our print preview, we can see that the spreadsheet is listed alphabetically by the movie title. And so here at the bottom we have all of the H's, and then Mission Impossible, and then on the second page we have the rest of the M's and then the rest of the alphabet. Well, I might decide as I go back to page 1 that Mission Impossible should really be on page 2 so that I have this nice break between the first part of the alphabet and then what becomes the second part of the alphabet. Well, to do that, we'll go back to our spreadsheet, and I'm going to come down to Mission Impossible and click on that cell. And then I'm going to go to the Page Layout tab and the Page Setup group. And this time we're going to go to the right of Print Area and select the drop-down for breaks. Now when I do that, we can see that we could insert a page break or remove a page break, or let's say that we try to do some adding and removing page breaks, but it's just not quite working the way that we want it to. Well, we could reset all of the page breaks back to their just original default. What we want to do though is insert a page break here where we will move Mission Impossible to the second page. So we'll click Insert Page Break. And then you can see, without even going to a print preview, that that has happened, because as I look sort of above Mission Impossible, right at that border between row 31 and 32, we have a slightly darker, maybe wider line showing that that is where the page break occurs. So let's go to File and Print. And now as we look at our print preview, we can see that all of the H's ending with hook are on the first page, and as we go to the second page, Mission Impossible has moved to that second page. Well, let's go back to our spreadsheet, because we also have a dotted line here, dashed line really, that is at the right border of column E, and that shows the natural page break as you go through the columns. So if we had a wide enough spreadsheet, a new page, if it were to be printed, would be the one that starts with column F. Now let's go back to our breaks though and remove the page break, which moves Mission Impossible yet again onto the first page. But let me click off of it just a little bit so you can see that because we're going back to the default natural page breaks, we also have that same dashed line under Mission Impossible as well. Now these lines appear after you do File, Print, and look at that print preview for the first time. All right, so let's go back to File and Print. And as we look at our print preview, we're back, in fact, to the default settings, and Mission Impossible is on that first page. I've reset our spreadsheet one more time, and this time we're going to look at our File, Print, and Print Preview to look at one more thing that you need to be aware of when you set up your spreadsheets. So let's go to File and Print. And as you look at page 1 at the top, we have movie title, genre, starring actors, year made. But when I go to page 2, there are no titles here. Now this information in this particular spreadsheet is different enough that you're not going to confuse, say, the movie title with who is acting in it. So that is not as maybe necessary as if you have a spreadsheet where you have just columns of numbers that all look very similar. Let's say that they're all 5 digits or all 10 digits or something like that. Well, but still, even with just 2 pages, wouldn't it be nice to have the column headings here on page 2? Well, let's go back. And again, we're going to be on that Page Layout tab in the Page Setup Area group, because what we're going to do is go to the very last button here, Print Titles. So when I click on Print Titles, I get a dialog box, and if you're familiar with this, you've been using Excel for a while, because this is a dialog box that has been around since Excel started. But what we want to do is, as we look At the tabs, we're going to look at the fourth tab, which is Sheet. Notice that the first option here is we can even define the print area from here if we want to type that in. But then below that, print titles. And it says, what rows do you want to repeat at the top? Well, I'm just going to click in that little text box and go to the right where I get that up arrow and click. And then I can simply click on the 1 for the row number, and it does all of the work for me here, saying we're going to print rows 1 through row 1. And then I'm going to go back over to the right where now I have a down arrow, and it expands that dialog box again. And so it says that I have row 1 that I'm going to repeat. Now, when you have a huge spreadsheet, you may decide that not only do you need to repeat the column headings, but you also need to repeat the row headings, which is usually column A, sometimes A, B, and C, and you would, again, either click and drag or type in that information. Lots of times when you have, say, a customer information, you would have that customer's name in column A, and then you would be able to line up what the customer has ordered and their history and whatever else is in that spreadsheet. But this becomes hugely important. Now, again, from this dialog box, and we've seen this before, that down in the lower right, we can go to Print Preview here in the second button. So we can print preview. And so now I have page 1, movie title, genre, starring actors, year made. But when I go to page 2, it repeats that same information, movie title, genre, starring actors, year made. And that can really make or break your spreadsheet. The larger the spreadsheet, the more this becomes just invaluable. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning, where you'll find such great resources as Universal Class, LinkedIn Learning, and Learning Express Library. Be sure to also find us on Facebook and YouTube. On Facebook, you can find us at MCPL 360, and on YouTube, you can find us on our MCPL MO channel, and be sure to look for our MCPL Consumer Technology Resources playlist. We will premiere new videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. But don't worry, all of our videos stay right there all the time. So if you miss one of our premieres, don't worry, you can come back and find them when it's convenient to you. Hope to see you there.